You're listening to the Boss Yourself First podcast, Season 3, Episode 7. Have you ever spent time and energy tweaking a font for a presentation to get it just right, only to realize 3 hours later, everyone else is leaving and you haven't even actually created the presentation? If so, my friend, you have leveraged productive procrastination, and you might want to thank the sponsor of that technique, perfectionism. But no worries, stay tuned because this episode will help. Welcome back. I'm Robyn White, the host of the Boss Yourself First podcast, where we lead from the inside out with clarity, courage, and a whole lot of compassion. We're in the season of permission, which coincides with the release of my new book, 3 Permissions. And I've been teeing this up for the last couple of episodes. It's time for the pop quiz, my friends. What are the permission principles? The permission principles, I'll give you a hint. There are 3. And don't get distracted by the permissions in the book, feel, fail, and fly, because there are 3 of those as well. But think about the overarching permission principles that can apply to any permission. Okay, next hint. Are you ready? They all start with the letter A. Are you with me now? Can you name all 3? Okay, are you ready? Here they are. I'm going to just tell you now. The 3 principles of the permission journey are approach, adjust, and act. Did you get them? Woo! Celebrate. Well done. Did you miss them? 1? All 3? No worries. I suspect you'll get them next time. Besides, you have permission to mess up. Permission to fail, right? All right, my friends. They're stuck in your brain now. I think the little pop quiz helped to get them there if they weren't already. And if they were, then well done. That's the end of testing for today. Speaking of today, I am so glad you're here. Let me ask you something that might feel a little bit too real. Something you've been working on or dreaming about. It's not done yet. And because it's not done, somehow you're starting to wonder if you're just not enough to get it done. This episode is for the ones who feel stuck in the gap between I started and it's finished. It's for all of you who quietly postpone sharing their ideas, stepping forward, or even celebrating small wins because it's not perfect yet. And let's notice why this can trip us up. Progress is vulnerable. Being unfinished is uncomfortable. And perfectionism loves to weaponize discomfort. So today we're talking about a very powerful, very human permission to be in progress. Yes, overcoming perfectionism to finish what matters. All right, let's talk about what it means to approach the discomfort of being in progress, not with judgment, but with curiosity. So let's begin where all permission starts, in awareness and how we build that awareness by approaching. Most of us learn to celebrate the finished product, the before and after photo, the polished presentation, the ta-da moment. But what about that messy middle, the in-progress version of you? The one still editing, still figuring it out, still becoming is just as worthy of visibility. I think we see a lot of that in the way we curate what we put out online, and I do it too. We pick and we select what we put out there, but I think when we forget to honor the progress and the process, that we're not only creating an illusion to others, but sometimes I think we buy into it ourselves. So, you know how pop culture sometimes does a surprisingly good job of capturing our wiring, and I think when we see elements of ourselves in the characters of a show, that resonance and the connections, that's what keeps us coming back for more. There is a brilliant and funny illustration of all of this in a Big Bang episode called The Closure Alternative. It's season 6, I think, towards the end. Anyway, Amy tries to help Sheldon with his compulsive need for closure by literally stopping him before he can finish anything. Songs, domino lines, tic-tac-toe games, toys. I think there was a Jack-in-the-Box in there. Sheldon ends up completely unhinged. And that is a televised version of something called the Zeigarnik Effect. And it's in action. It opens loops. It drives tension. But the real insight here isn't just the drama. It's that Sheldon's reactions show how deeply our brains crave closure. And yet, when we tie our worth to perfect endings, we paralyze ourselves from sometimes starting, for sure sharing, and sometimes seeing something all the way through completion. It's funny, but it's also real, and that's, I think, part of why it's funny, because we can see ourselves in it. Our brains are wired to notice and fixate on unfinished tasks. Open loops create tension, and your brain flags that unfinished business as something to resolve. But if we're not careful, especially as high achievers, that tension turns into pressure to finish perfectly. And we stop seeing the draft as progress, and we start seeing it as a personal flaw. We almost internalize that tension. So when we talk about permission to be in progress, we're not saying don't care or don't try. We're saying show up even when it's still messy, because your brain is already invested, and what it really needs now is movement, not mastery. Okay, I mentioned before the Zeigarnik Effect. Before we talk strategy, let's talk science, because leveraging perfectionism to feel better and get relief from ruminating about unfinished business is disempowering. It's demotivating. It's in your brain wiring. So in the 1920s, psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, so that should kind of hint that she's going to name this effect, or it's going to be named after her. But this psychologist describes our tendency to remember incomplete tasks better than complete ones. And I thought this was a really interesting study. Zeigarnik discovered first this by observing waiters in a cafe who could recall orders that hadn't been delivered yet with super accuracy. But once the order was complete, the details just vanished. They let go of it. Her experiment showed that people remember incomplete tasks nearly twice as well as complete ones. That lingering mental tension is now called the Zeigarnik Effect. That's the open loop your mind wants to close. But here's what's fascinating. Your brain is wired to keep mental tabs open until the task is done. That's why half-written drafts, unreturned emails, or unfinished projects keep tugging at you. But wait, there's more. That tension, it releases dopamine, your brain's anticipation and motivation chemical, which means your brain doesn't need perfection to feel satisfaction. Let me say that again. Your brain doesn't need perfection to feel satisfaction. It needs movement, forward motion, progress. But if you stall out in perfectionism, that motivation loop breaks. You stay stuck in the discomfort without relief. Let's keep approaching by diving a little deeper into the neuroscience of this. Unfinished tasks don't just stay top of mind, they mess with your dopamine reward system. And we've talked about dopamine before. I mentioned it a minute ago, but we've talked about dopamine, and generally, I think it's associated more with pleasure, often called like the feel-good hormone. But dopamine isn't just about pleasure, it's about motivation. It helps determine whether you act and when you persist, especially when efforts feel risky or uncertain. So let's put this together. Let's look at dopamine's role in the Zeigarnik Effect. So here's what's happening in your brain with both processes when you finish and when you delay finishing. So initially, dopamine rises when you start a task. Your brain knows this matters. It's in attention. It's ready to go. If you keep moving through the work, the dopamine continues a steady flow. Maybe not quite as much as it first was, but it's consistent. And that helps you maintain your focus. When the task is completed, even better, dopamine fires and a stronger reward dose happens. So think about how good it feels, and I do this all the time. Think about how good it feels to check off your to-do list. That's the dopamine reward. And I will tell you, I put showering on my to-do list so that I can check it off and get that nice little click of dopamine and continue moving forward. But if you don't let yourself close the loop and it's not checked off, the reward never arrives and your dopamine flow just flatlines. If perfectionism keeps you stuck in the loop, waiting for something to feel just right, the dopamine never spikes at the end. You lose the reward signal, and instead of feeling completion, you feel frustration, regret, sometimes shame. And there's always that paralyzing rumination. When I say that, I'm talking about the looping effect in your mind, that it comes forward constantly. Your brain doesn't want to leave it alone. It's basically signaling you to pay attention to it. So finishing, even in a fledgling way, releases that tension. I talk about this sometimes with writers or even clients who have a really big task at hand. If you can break it down into miniature tasks, mini goals, then you can really collect that nice dopamine reward at the end of the mini goal and don't have to wait all the way to the end of the big goal. So that's just one strategy to think about as you create awareness around this as you look at it. So finishing, even in a fledgling way, releases that tension. It gives your brain that reward, the dopamine hit. It signals completion. It says, yes, what you do matters, and therefore you matter. You're safe to rest now. Remember, our brains are sending us messages all the time. They show up for a reason, but we don't always interpret them accurately and take them as identity markers instead of data to inform our actions. Here's how this shows up in everyday life. So I know this sounds a little repetitive, but I want to make sure that we're all together on this. So your brain notices something left incomplete. That open loop creates motivational tension. Dopamine circuits say, this matters, keep track of it. You either close it by completion or let guilt and shame or fear take up residence instead. Perfectionists often open loops, but keep loops open to make them perfect or get overwhelmed with the process of perfecting them. And for whichever reason, they don't close them. And the brain holds that tension, and you end up stuck in shame with dwindling motivation from the dopamine depletion. And the brain's efforts to keep our attention become rumination about open loops, sucks energy, informs our self-talk, and diminishes our focus. That is the trap we want to transform today. Not by ignoring preparation, but by letting yourself finish, even imperfectly, so your brain can release the tension and reward your effort. This episode isn't just about letting go. It's about leveraging your neurobiology to act while still growing. Remember, your brain doesn't need perfection to feel satisfaction. It needs movement, that forward progress, motion. Let me give you an example from a client of mine that we're going to call Hannah. A client who had a half-written book chapter that haunted her. Every time she looked at it, shame whispered, you should have finished this by now. If you were really a writer, this would be done. You're not really a writer. This is just a hobby or, a spur-of-the-moment thing. And she wasn't avoiding the work. She was avoiding the feelings that came with not finishing it perfectly. But once we named what was happening in her brain, we talked about the dopamine and we talked about the Zeigarnik Effect, and that her loop was still open. The dopamine was flatlining. I asked her, what's the smallest permission you could give yourself to create movement in this project? And she gave herself permission for just one thing. Open the file and read what she wrote. No editing, no judgment. That was her micro permission, and it created movement, and it was just a little hit of motivating dopamine. 2 days later, she finished the chapter, and the feedback from her editor was, yes, we're getting there. This is the kind of honesty and authenticity we need in it. So before we move into the second principle, which is adjust, let's pause here for just an important nuance. I've touched on it, but I want to make sure that it's not overlooked. Permission to be in progress doesn't mean you stop preparing. It means you stop punishing yourself for not being perfect. I want to be crystal clear. Preparation is powerful. I prepare for these episodes. I prepare for my classes. And I help clients prepare for interviews or big projects or writing assignments. And I absolutely want you to prep for the interview, rehearse the talk, think through how you want to show up. But here's the key. Preparation builds confidence. Perfectionism erodes it. Preparation says, I care and I'm being really intentional. And perfectionism whispers, if it isn't flawless, you're not enough. I hope you're seeing the difference. But how do you know which one you're in? Try asking, am I planning or avoiding? Am I refining or spiraling? Am I making this better or trying to control how I'll be perceived? Because my friends, I get it. You want to show up well, and you should. But showing up well doesn't require you to show up without a flaw. It means showing up on purpose. So yes, write the outline, practice the pitch, choose the words carefully, but don't let perfect be the prerequisite for sharing. If you're still unsure, you can ask, what do I believe about what enough looks like? I think getting clarity there can really be helpful. And am I leading with permission or hiding behind perfection? Just notice it. Don't judge it. Know that if you're stuck in the loop of perfection, you're not lazy. You're protecting yourself from vulnerability. So here's your reframe. Good enough to serve is your green light. Not flawless, not final, faithful. Not pristine, in progress, on purpose, in motion. The shift, by the way, that's dopamine doing its job again. When we believe we're making progress, our brains stay motivated. But when we tell ourselves it's not worth doing unless it's perfect, The dopamine dips, and so does our drive. So today, I invite you to adjust your expectations, not to settle, but to support your sanity. Okay, let's talk about the last permission principle, act. This is where we have to amp up our courage when it comes to this permission. Because now we're asking, what action can I take even while I'm still becoming? It's vulnerable to act when the outcome is unclear, to post something that's not perfectly edited, to speak up before the pitch is polished, to try, knowing it might not land cleanly. But here's the truth. The longer you wait to show up until you feel ready, the more likely you are to never show up at all. I have to laugh because as I was writing this, it reminded me some of the advice that we would get as a young couple in regards to starting our family was, if you wait till you're ready to have kids, you probably won't. It's a little like that. If you wait till you feel ready, you might just not show up at all. So let's talk about what your micro permissions could look like. You could share a work in progress, just sort of building up your tolerance to being in progress. And be kind to yourself. Make sure that self-talk stays nice. Be compassionate as you would for someone else. Let people see the middle. Ask for feedback before it's done, before it's perfect. It doesn't have to be to everybody. Remember, you're building some muscle here. Just ask for some feedback before it's complete. Say, before I polish this, could you have a look at it? Tell me your thoughts. Record the voice memo or the video. Even if you delete it later, go ahead and record it. And let someone witness your becoming. This has been in the forefront of my mind lately because we've been putting out a lot of posts about the book because the book just came out. And I've said to my team multiple times, I'm not going to perfect it. I have to say it out loud, so I won't do it. I'm not going to look at it anymore. If you say it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and release it. For one, I don't have time. We're putting out too much stuff for me to really agonize over every word. So grace, please, if you see something that's not perfect, you give it to me, I give it to you. That's how this works. So while you're doing this, while you're working on these micro permissions, I want to caution you in two things. One, that self-talk. I already touched on it. Show up with compassion for yourself. Have your own back here. Be proud of yourself for stepping into a little bit of discomfort to be in progress. And two, practice your breathing. I think it was last week we talked about exhale dominant breathing, where your exhale is longer than your inhale. The pattern I think we shared last week was inhale for 4 seconds, exhale for 6 to 8 seconds, and do that for 1 to 2 minutes. You can set a timer on your phone or whatever works for you. Just even as you think about doing your micro permissions, let your brain feel safe, even when you feel a little exposed. In the book, I talk about permission not being a one-time event, but a practiced way of relating to yourself and others. And this permission to be in progress might be the most honest one of all. Maybe authentic's the better word, I'm not sure. Because here's the reality though, you're never going to feel fully done. You're always going to be growing, learning, refining, and that's not a flaw. It's the evidence that you're alive and you're becoming. So let me ask you, where are you hiding because you're not ready yet? And I say this with compassion because I've asked myself these questions too. I continue to do that. What story are you telling yourself about the unfinished work, whatever that is? And what would you change if you saw progress as a signal of strength, right? You're getting it done. Remember those mini goals too. That can help you mark that progress and go, yep, celebrate it. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be finished. You just have to be becoming. All right, here's your permission slip for this week. You are allowed to be in progress. And your unfinished version is still worthy of being seen, heard, and valued. I just want to make sure you hear that. Your unfinished version is still worthy of being seen and heard and valued. And if nobody's told you today, I'm going to tell you, I value you so much. I really do. If today's episode gave you something to think about, or maybe just a little exhale of relief, I'd love to stay connected. You can join my email list for thoughtful, bite-sized encouragement that lands in your inbox, not your overwhelm. You'll find the link for that in the show notes. And if 3 Permissions is resonating with you, you can grab a copy wherever you buy books, and maybe even share it with a friend who's navigating their own becoming. And hey, if you believe in this podcast and want to support it in small but mighty ways, there's a link in the show notes to help with that too. It makes a big difference, and I'm grateful for every listen, every share, every nudge of encouragement. Thank you for being here, and thank you for leading yourself first.